Hello YouTube, this is Captain Nav. I hope you are all doing well. Today I will be flying the RNAV approach runway 09 in Bali Denpasar Airport, ICAO code Whiskey Alpha Delta Delta in Indonesia. So we'll have a look at how we can set up the FMC. Go departure arrival, RNAV 09, Batu 1 Charlie arrival, and Kuta transition. Execute. Then on the legs page, we'll have a look at the navigation display. We're inbound CASAP, so we'll select CASAP, go back to page 1, set it on top and execute. We reset Mcp altitude because the next waypoint is showing 8,000 feet, so we'll set 8,000 feet and get rid of the message. Then we'll continue reviewing the legs page. We've got Careo 8,000 feet, Kuta 3,000 feet, so we can set 3,000 feet or above by adding A and execute. Hold that Kuta, we don't really want to hold, so we'll set the next waypoint and execute. And the rest of the waypoints make sense, the sequence is good, so we'll leave it as it is. And then the missed approach is good as well. Hold that Kuta at the end, 3,000 feet. We'll pick up the final approach fix, Delta Delta 403, and set a 2-mile ring over it to show where the final approach fix is on the approach. We can engage RNAV now, we have the navigation sorted out. Next we'll check the VRF, which is set, and then on progress page 4, we'll set the RNP 0.3 for the approach. By setting the RNP, you basically tell the FMC how far it can take you off course before giving you a navigation error alert. So we've got auto brake 2, and the last thing we need to do now is set the minima. So the minima for this approach is 370. So we'll set 370, which is not that far. Cool, so after that we are all done. We'll change to a track, because on this aircraft we tend to fly with track when flying in RNAV, because obviously RNAV gives us a track, not a heading, so we tend to fly with track selected. So just a last minute change really. We'll set 180 to Delta Delta 402 so that the FMC calculates a better VNAV path and calculates a deceleration point that's during the approach. We'll see on the navigation display the green dot, which basically shows you when the aircraft starts decelerating from 240 knots below 10,000 feet to the flap up speed. Unfortunately, and it's a little bit the same in the aircraft actually, the FMC doesn't calculate a good deceleration path. It just takes you to the up speed, and then very often you need to add a bit of drag to reduce the speed, so it's not exactly decelerating all the way to the programmed speeds. Anyway, following a bit of feedback from the comments and interaction on the Twitch channel as well, there was a little bit of maybe clarification to be done on the RNAV approach. So basically RNAV approach is an approach flown with a GPS for the lateral tracking, and the FMC then also calculates vertical profile in accordance with the approach coded in the FMC. So in that respect, it's vital to have a valid QNH setting to fly the approach, because if you don't have a valid QNH setting, then the altimeter will and the FMC will calculate a wrong descent path. So contrary to an ILS approach, which relies on radio signals coming from the ground, the radio signal for the localizer, and also the radio signal for the glide slope, RNAV approach solely relies on the aircraft navigation system. The lateral guidance, as I said, is provided by GPS, and the vertical profile is determined by the FMC and proper QNH setting. So I guess one of the advantages of RNAV approaches is that you can fly an approach anywhere in the world, provided of course that an approach has been designed, you have GPS coverage there, and your navigation system on board is working. Actually, more and more RNAV approaches are being designed around the world, and they are slowly replacing VUR approaches and NDB approaches. I understand the latest Boeing 777s built by Boeing do not have ADF receiver, so you can fly one of the last few NDB approaches in the world with actually receiving the NDB signal. This is a clear indication that NDB and to a certain extent VOR approaches are becoming a thing of the past. The only inconvenience about RNAV approaches is that they won't take you as low as a Cat 1 ILS approach. The minima are usually a little bit higher than Cat 1 ILS. And also, of course, you cannot do an autoland. However, that capability is being developed at the moment. We already have Cat 1 GLS approaches, which are basically RNAV approaches with the GNSS signal, so the Global Navigation Satellite System signal, or GPS signal if you want, enhanced by a nearby ground station on the ground. And as I said, the Cat 2, Cat 3 approaches will come fairly soon. So we can see the area around the airport in the distance, and now I'll show you on the navigation display the green dot, which is the point where the aircraft will decelerate from 240 knots to the up speed, which in this case will be 226 knots. So we'll see how it works out. The aircraft will do it by itself. Obviously it's programmed to do so, but otherwise there's no input from the pilot. So we'll wait for the speed to reduce. You can see at the moment the speed window on the MCP is closed, and VNAV is therefore controlling the speed as it is displayed on the PFD 240 knots. So we're getting close to the green dot now. Here we are. The speed is now up to 226 knots, and VNAV is now trying to bring the speed back towards 226 knots. However, as you can see with the green altitude range arc on the navigation display, at the moment the aircraft is calculating to be at 3000 feet by Delta 402, and actually the rate of descent has not really changed. So it seems like, and it's actually, as I said earlier on in the video, it's a little bit the same on the aircraft. Most of the time the VNAV doesn't really calculate a deceleration path too well, so most of the time you have to add a little bit of drag, as I'm doing at the moment here, adding a bit of speed brake, and then adding a bit of flaps to add more drag to help the speed reduction. And now we'll go for flaps 1. And as you can see, as soon as you got flap 1 indicated and you open the speed window, then you've got the flap 1 speed bugged on the PFD. So the speed is now scheduled to be 206 knots. And obviously VNAV is gonna try to bring the speed back to 206 knots. Flap 1 will initially help, but as you can see the speed is not reducing too quickly. So once again you can add more drag and add for example flaps 5 now, and hopefully with flaps 5 the speed will come back a little bit more, because obviously we've got more drag with the flaps. But eventually we'll have to use maybe a bit of speed brake to try to manage the speed ourselves. Sometimes in the aircraft, VNAV calculates some sort of last minute deceleration point. There's no green dots at all on the aircraft. Maybe that's a configuration thing, but on the one I'm flying, there's certainly none. But having this last minute deceleration path is a little bit makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable, because you're not really sure if it's gonna do it or not, as there's no indications, and if at the last minute it doesn't do it, then you're fast and it's not an ideal situation. So I would rather control the speed myself than let the aircraft do it, or rely on the aircraft to do it. So as you can see, I had to use a little bit of speed brakes to bring the speed towards 186 knots, the flaps 5 speed. So it's looking good. Otherwise, the tracking is nice and accurate. We're now going towards Delta 402, and the green altitude range arc shows we're gonna be at 3,000 feet at that point. So we can now reset the MCP altitude to 1,700 feet, which is the altitude at the final approach fix. We'll go flaps 15 and reduce the speed further to about 170 knots. So why do we have to set 1,700 feet first and then set the minima? Well, we need to make sure that we're gonna cross the final approach fix at the right altitude. So that's why we set 1,700 feet first and then set the minima later on. So it's all looking good. The frames are a little bit suffering due to the scenery I installed for Bali, fortunately, but it's not too bad. So that being said, looks like we're doing fairly well. We're becoming established on the final approach track. So we'll set the track 086 on the MCP, and we are on VNAV path. The green altitude range arc shows we're gonna be level at about 1,700 feet, so we're gonna make it, so there's no issues there. So we can now reset the minima, go VNAV path, speed intervention, we are all good. We can go gear down, flaps 20, arm the speed brake, and display the landing checklist when we have time, and the crew can be seated as well. The cabin was ready a few minutes ago, so that's good. And yeah, now basically configuring the aircraft for the final approach, and we can go flap 30 and set final approach speed VRF plus 5, which is 146 plus 5, 151. Waiting for the flaps to extend, and once they'll be extended we can do the landing checklist. So got 30 green, so landing checklist complete, we close the display, and now we pass the final approach fix. We are looking good, all descending in VNAV path, so we can reset the missed approach altitude 3,000 feet. Now that we are all set, we can enjoy the approach. It's a lovely approach, nice blue water, and generally it's a lovely area in the simulator. You can use the flight path vector to provide further guidance on our vertical profile. And now basically waiting for the 1000 auto callout, at which stage we'll check that the missed approach altitude is set, which is the case. We can see on the PFD 3000 feet, and now we're flying the aircraft manually. Autopilot is off, flying with the flight director. which gives us guidance all the way to about 50 feet. Although in the simulator it goes on to VNAV alt as you'll see later on. But in the aircraft, the flight director just drops at 50 feet. So everything is looking good. We are on the puppy profile, 2 whites, 2 reds as it seems, approaching minimums, so we can continue the approach. There's no problem there. Adjusting the aircraft lateral path to aim for the center line, at least that's the plan. And you'll see, as I said, once we get to about 50 feet, we'll get VNAV alt non-shaded, which is not correct. So after that, once we've got VNAV alt non-shaded, we need to disregard the flight director, otherwise it wants to level off basically, and then continue the last segment of the approach to landing. So we are now touched down, reversers straight away as usual. Auto brakes are working their magic, and at 60 knots we stow the reversers, and then I can use a bit of manual braking. We got ICAS auto brake, which basically tells us that we have disconnected the auto brake.
1,200 meters remaining.
That's it, we'll vacate next left. And welcome to Bali Denpasar Airport, Whiskey Alpha Delta Delta in sunny Indonesia. So I hope you enjoyed the approach today. It's a lovely approach to fly actually, great fun. And if you want to see actually the approach with bad weather and actually a little bit of a surprise, as indicated on the Facebook page a couple of days ago, then I invite you to stay tuned and have a look at what's coming next. But in the meantime, thank you very much for watching the video. It was a pleasure to have you on board once again. And if you like the video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you want to see more similar content, and generally I keep up to date with the Captain Nav channel, then please subscribe. Thank you very much once again for watching, and take care, and I'll see you soon. Thank you very much, and stay tuned for more to come. So here we are for more. As you can see, the weather outside is quite interesting. A lot of flashes, and the weather radar display is looking quite threatening, should I say. So we'll just have a look. There's a little bonus for you with this approach. I was one of the recordings for the approach, and with real weather, this is what happens. So I thought I would share it with you. So we are on the final approach, as you can see, approaching minimums, and oh surprise,
monitor radar display.
we get a monitor radar display. So at this stage, what we need to do is basically to avoid the area depicted by the weather radar on the navigation display. So it looks like it's gonna be just beyond the runway. So we'll continue the approach and see what happens. So approaching the runway.
100.
The wind is actually calm.
50.
Go around. Wind shear.
Now we
ahead.
go wind shear and go around.
10.
So actually I'll go to the go around. I'm quite curious to see what happens. And wow, look at the wind, the sudden wind increase.
Go
It's
around. Wind
quite
shear ahead.
interesting the way the simulation creates that wind shear. All of a sudden you get 40 knots from the side. So I'm not really sure what would have happened and during the landing. The last bit of the landing started to go around by about 20 feet, but it could have been interesting. I chose to go around just to see what would happen, and here's the result. It's fairly frightening. So yeah, that's about it. So thank you once again for watching. I hope you enjoy the ride there. It's very interesting, the simulator there. It's all over the place. But never mind. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you soon.